5 is here with us, and we're live on YouTube right now. So if you know someone who didn't get to register, you can just go to our Baraza channel on YouTube, Baraza Media Lab on YouTube, and send them the link, and they can join ahead. They can join along with us. Yes. So I'm just going to give our attendees maybe another 60 seconds or so. And then we can get started formally with Rosemary Okello Olale with her keynote speech. She's the director of Africa Media Hub at Strathmore University, our partners in putting together this series. All right. So maybe just one more minute as our attendees join the room. All right, I think we're ready to begin now. I'm going to hand over the room to Rosemary, who has a keynote presentation prepared for us. Thank you for everyone who was able to make time to be here today. I see some familiar names. I see some names of people who have been with us since the beginning, and I don't take your time for granted. I was telling the panelists earlier, we're in a season of Zoom fatigue. So whenever people make time, to join us on these sessions, I truly, truly appreciate it. Rosemary, please.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, everyone. Thank Baraza Lab for putting this together. It's not been an easy journey, but it's been an insightful journey of just trying to explore the future of a funeral of the media sector. While people have been talking about the negativity that the media has lost its direction, I'm honored to sit in front before you with key actors that shape the media in this country. Dorothy Quayle, who is like my senior, and I call her my mom because she's the first person to have ever welcomed me in the newsroom. J.O., whom I knew as one of the key sub-editors, becoming the managing editor of the Daily Nation. Cobb Chessy was one of those specialized media personnel within the early 2000 and became to be one of the key people that also became my mentor. So when I was asked to talk about this subject matter, I was saying, what could I say in front of these key panelists who are actually have got their own experiences to even to share. We've got a book to write about their experiences, but also I've mentored so many people. So many of you who are attending this session might not have known that in the late 80s, early 90s, what controlled the media houses was time. Time was the king. And the tools that you needed to have had is actually a pen and a notebook, and you never lost it because it became your reference and your guidance. The other thing that was required was the extra skills, that is typewriting and learning how to typewrite very fast, but also shorthand. These things actually equipped you to become one of the best journalists. But as the topic says, when you look back, like anywhere else in the world, the media in Kenya is at crossroad. The process of democratization processes, as well as growing access to technology, has resulted in tremendous growth, as is seen enhanced liberalized airwaves, as seen actually citizen journalism coming to fore. And social journalism, which we laughed when it became that it's going nowhere, has become central to it. Yet at the same time, the outcome of increase of competition is tendency of media is still the same, trying to access the audience and trying to get them hooked to their content. So when German philosopher Jürgen Habermas and every media person who is here today have read his book, Celebrated the Public Sphere, created by the French merchant class in the 18th century, he was noting that when non-aristocrats started to talk to each other about what should happen, they found enough common cause to overrun an order. They also, ordinary people, talking to each other about what matters as what holds the power of cooperation and government in a society, for a society to be accountable. So for Jorgen, as we can see, the public sphere was critical, and this public sphere is what the media presented. And newspaper dating back up to 1600s, the first British newspaper, that is the Oxford Gazette, was published in 1965. And the 19th century then followed as a period of newspaper boom by the 20th century. Each city had its own privately published newspaper. And just to remind you, during those times, they had what called lithographic process of producing a newspaper, whereby letters were put in together to actually make a sentence. And also then they go through a process that was going, reproductive processes, where films were developed, and Dindo will bear me witness here when he'll be speaking. And that also you do a reproductive. So by the end, when you run to industrial area to produce a newspaper, which was a 16-page, you are running with a reproductive manager will run with a plate that dare it not be scratched, so that no mistakes can be made. So unlike when the news editor used to be central in deciding how stories are covered and published, because there used to be like a meeting in the morning, many newsrooms are adapting the digital newsroom, where the audience are central to news processing. Before, it was the issue and the time. Now is the audience. So social media, therefore, is becoming a critical new way of covering and distribution and allowing a two-way conversation, as opposed to the news editor decided. And this has made the value of the story used to be key in how the story is being told. And during our time, what actually managed or was the guideline was like a newsroom Bible was the code of ethics. You never applied anything without the code of ethics. And you ask, have you read the code of ethics? Do you understand all section of the code of ethics? And I'll be interested to hear if any of you have seen the code of ethics, the current code of ethics that includes also digital journalism. In our days, the print, electronic, as well as photographic was critical to have code of ethics. There's no doubt that media is powerful, so it can't be the defender of the media. Marshall McLuhan has argued that available media actually shape human activity. In his famous phrase, the media is the message. McLuhan predicts the upheaval of local cultures, especially in the era of globalized values. He said, any technology tends to create a new human environment. Technological environment are not merely passive containers of people, but also active processes that reshape people and also other technologies alike. So how has the media been affected? I'll quote Dennis McQuill in his 81, when he wrote in 81 around demassified and globalized reality. He says that the decline of mass society, of what he refers to demassification, refers to a situation whereby the traditional mass audience splinter into all sorts of subgroups, some interested in this, some that, some are also demographically divided. This situation is actually a consequence of new communication technologies like the internet and the satellite. Like before, when correspondence, actually newsroom was the telephone booth. Before that, I wonder how they used to send their stories from all the way from Busia or all the way from Kwale without any telephone line. So telephone was key and the telephone booth was key. So Tolfa argues in his book, The Third Wave, that society appears to be moving in a certain direction. He described the three waves of change that have occurred in the human history, from agrarian society, that's the first wave, to industrial society, second wave, and now information society. And the fourth one is coming, which is fourth industrial actually revolution. We will be with us very soon. So we now see a situation where different media organizations are no longer targeting a mass audience, but are dealing with a niche audiences. And when my panelists will be coming speaking, that niche audiences actually by that time was defined by media speciality. You either became a political journalist, you became a science journalist, you became either a gender journalist, but now is a niche audience as opposed to thematic areas. For instance, audiences are now being categorized by age group or social class or by in different media houses. That's how they see their market. But the general trend is they also spice their news with all sorts of entertainment called infotainment, and which is on the increase. And we can see that FM broadcasting have actually adapted it into various formats. And these have made the media actually not to follow a bit of ethics, they are a bit of lies. So the impact to this is that the newsroom is shrinking and the media landscape is actually changing. And the question is, what is the future of our traditional media? So the public relation industry also has been affected, where we saw them as the key way entry point to the public institution, either to the private sector or public institution, or now understanding how the media works. The other thing is undeniable is that news desk also have been actually reformatted. Before I said a news editor decided everything, and a news editor will send you as a journalist to cover a story with a photographer or a cameraman, and you came back and say, what's the news? Before even you start typing with a typewriter, you have actually done the news in your head before even before you type. So by the time you go ahead to type it, the story has been given space. But now one person becomes everything. You are the news, you are actually the photographer, you type it in your phone, wherever you are, and you send it already typed. So traditional media used to allow us to target business as a broader target group. But the new media actually is making us connect to the niche and using specific moments. Whereas then the time was the king, time is more of essential of actually the life of the news within which you interact with. And that's why we say that we need to look at, being the fourth industrial estate, we need to look at the fifth angle, the various angle where we do the stories. We don't focus on the news. We look at the hiding areas which we can bring to the target audience and the niche audience. So when we are looking at the digital age, we are seeing that digital age has adapted its own unique skills. Whereas as we move from the agrarian stage to information stage, typewriter from lithographic became the key, and then adaptation of computers became the key. Now data journalism is becoming a key factor. And that data journalism have actually introduced what we call a two-way communication, and where statistics is not just a number, statistics becomes a voice. And it has also created what we call how to understand this information. The way we also learned the typewriting as a skill will require us to learn actually interpreting and visualizing of this data as a skill in addition to journalism. And there's need to be a guideline to it. And the way code of conduct rule the media houses, the ethics of using data journalism guideline is critical, so that you don't use data that somebody's pushing somebody's agenda, but you know whether it's ethical or not ethical. So as we enter into this, and the question is the traditional media still credible? I can argue that traditional media is still the most credible news source. It's essential for conveying brand messaging as it is instantly recognizable. Newspaper, magazine, radio, and television will always be recognized to anyone at any age, as it has been established for decades. A newspaper even date back in century. During our time, our grandmothers described the radio as something that hears from far, and the TV as somebody that sees from far. In fact, when you appeared in those, you were very much respected because it's a platform that was only relegated or given to those who matters in the society. So those who are not part of the digital transition, rarely solely or broadcasting, will argue that traditional media is not part of this. But you'll find that even the social writers and the bloggers take leverage within the newspaper. So you find like a blog will be reprinted back into a newspaper like in Washington Post does with some of the blog articles. So the bottom line is this, that traditional news is not dead, yet still plays an important role in the fluid digital age of journalism. What we need to is still have the ethical standard of journalism, still make news become trustworthy, make the news become actually recognizable even in the platform, package the news in the niche audience that it has identified in a way that we can consume in a way that is relevant to each and every audience. So going forward, I'll end by quoting late Peter da Costa, who is my mentor also, who I worked with closely at Interpress Service. While commenting on the role of the media in Africa, he had this to say: communication has always been the key to dissolving broader. The oral storytelling tradition was the way in which us Africans started our news, preserved our history, ensured our social cohesion and stability, and charted our future. We should see the media in Africa today as a continuation of our traditions. The African media is critical to fostering regional integration, but also of actually restoring our history and sharing of knowledge with people who are linked by common problems and common goals. So new technology like digital satellite radio can turn local content into a regional programming. So is the media therefore becoming irrelevant to majority of Kenyans? And is the media capturing the diversity issues emerging from the various communities in a view of enhancing their growth? I'll leave it to the panelists to talk about it. So we've got to get the alternative content out there to our people, or this country is going to die of too many lies. We need to reimagine, reinvent, and retool today for tomorrow audience. So I'd like to share with you just a few of 2 slides that I'd share just to show you how. So when you look at the evolution of communication networks here, you look at during the 1980s, 1G became a critical play when telephone actually enhanced, and this is the typewriter. And many of you, I'm sure, have not seen the typewriter. That was the 1G. The voice of communication was the key at that time. Then the dawn of internet came with the 2G, that's 1991. Emails, SMS. During this time of the 1G, I used to see, what do you call it, how people used to send news from abroad, the agencies, what do you call it? There are ways in which news could come.
Telex.
Yeah, yes. And it could be interpreted, real time. Here, emails took over, the dawn of the internet. Then the 3G became actually in 2002, where social media started becoming, browsing became a way of actually doing research. Video calls became a way of trying to actually connect with another. Social media became a key factor. And this time, actually, many of us wrote that social media was going to go nowhere. We have stand actually corrected. Now with the 4G here, and 4G is the age of data. And of course, HD content is now becoming a key factor. When you talk of the cloud, how then do we actually restore this? I said, if nation can restore all their data in the cloud, they'll become a rich organization. Online games is becoming a factor, something that was never there before. We are soon moving to the 5G, and this is the connected ecosystem that we'll be talking about, that still the media is still not irrelevant. The other thing I'd like to share is a research that was done a few years ago, that's my last presentation, about the future of the newspaper. And when I shared it in a meeting, people said, you are going nowhere. They say that in the US, 2017, the newspaper was going to be distinct. In Kenya, they gave us until 2030. And this shows how the newspaper is going to be extinct, and that mobile actually platform is going to become a way in which we access. So when I talk about we need to retool, revitalize, rethink on how we're accessing our audiences, we need to say which is the applicable. The media is not the medium. The media is the content. The medium is what has changed. So the media is here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you for that very rich presentation. You've laid the landscape of what was the best of the past and the reality that was there at that time, and also really brought into our minds and our consciousness the big changes that we've seen in the past few decades and what impact that has on not just journalism, but ethical journalism. I think you had a very strong point in that. My first question to our panel as we respond to Rosemary's presentation is this. What would you say constitutes the best of the past in Kenyan media? What would you say the Kenyan media can be most proud of in the time that you've been practicing journalists and editors? I think I'll start with Dorothy. What do you think the Kenyan media can be most proud of in the time that you've been practicing?
Thank you, Lisa. I think that one thing that the Kenyan media can be proud of over the period that I have been practicing is that it has been resilient in the sense that in spite of moments when they would just have caved in, they stood their ground and managed to be on top of things, by which I mean they remained the conscience of society, unearthing scandals that might otherwise have remained hidden, so that even if nothing might have been done about it substantively, but that people got to know that all is not well. We know, for instance, about the Goldenberg scandal, which is still with us. It has never been fully resolved, but if it were not for the media, nobody would have known that it even happened. And I think that those are some of the things, that is one of the things that the media can be truly proud of,
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Just a quick one to our attendees today. We're going to be taking questions throughout this session, so we won't have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, but instead we'll be picking up your questions as we go along. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see Q&A. So you can begin just typing in your questions or even comments there, and we'll start responding to them. If you have something else that you would want to tell us, which is not necessarily a question, then you can go ahead and put it in the chat window, and as we speak, we'll be responding. If you have a comment or even an observation, or if our sound goes off and we don't know any kind of technical issue, you can put it there in the chat window. Okay, maybe Komchatsi, tell us, what do you think constitutes the best of the past, and what do you think the Kenyan media has to be proud of?
Thank you, Christine. And I feel very overwhelmed speaking after Rosemary and Dorothy. But I think the thing for me that stands out is trust. The Kenyan media over time has cultivated and trust. I like to fall back on what the American playwright Arthur Miller once said, which is that a newspaper is a nation talking to itself. And I think the media in Kenya has done a pretty decent job of managing national conversations and being this place of trust where people can go and have a conversation with one another, sometimes on very difficult subjects. I think that for me, that's the instant thing that comes to mind. The propensity for curiosity and the enterprise that has attended the practice of media and journalism over the past decades that we've been a country. I think for me, that's a very quick takeaway.
Komchatsi, what would you say to criticism of this glowing picture that you've painted of the Kenyan media being trusted, when the Kenyan media has sided with commercial forces, with repressive power over the years, and dropped the ball on many, many instances to safeguard that trust that the Kenyan public has in the media?
Yeah, you know, if you come from the Christian tradition, there's a thing called backsliding. So I suspect that what has happened is some of the media might have lost the way, but I can't say that it's a completely lost cause. I also have looked at other documents, including the most recent Afrobarometer survey that shows that there's a general decline in public trust for the media, which I think is a valid criticism because of the challenges of operating in a very complex and evolving environment. And I think the criticism about killing or bending to the will of the political or corporate power is not unfounded. Those are challenges that are acknowledged by even people who are still in practice today. And I think it's just to begin to think now that technology has evolved the practice, as Rosemary was outlining, technology has evolved the practice of journalism and created more time and space, including intellectual headspace, to enable journalists to earn that trust. I don't think that the trust that the media has enjoyed was just automatic. I think it came because they did certain things that were right, they did certain things that resonated with the public, and they did certain things that connected the public to the issues that were critical to them. There are, of course, questions about partisanship. And so right now, I think every time somebody sees my byline, they want, first of all, either to pigeonhole me according either to my ethnicity or perceived political persuasion, which is, I think, just the way we need to accept that as the way our discourses are evolving. But I think maybe then that places the question of trust on the table as something that needs to be renegotiated.
Right, Komchatsi, thank you for that. Odindo, you've heard Komchatsi calling it backsliding. And in our previous session 2 weeks ago, our keynote speaker didn't use that term, decline, that is usually used. Komchatsi has called it backsliding. Our keynote speaker 2 weeks ago called it retreat, the retreat of the mainstream media. And I'm just wondering if you can respond to that framing. Do you see it as a backsliding, like as an unfortunate consequence of gravity? Or do you see something closer to abdicating a position that was once held? Odindo, you'll have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you.
So that is an indicator of age, number one. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. Backsliding, abdication, those are relative terms. Yeah, certainly it's an acknowledgement of change, that things are not exactly the way they were. But I always say that media should never be judged without taking into consideration the context in which and the age in which it's operating. If you get stuck in the past and keep applying the standards that were applicable to media, maybe in the heat of the campaign against the single party system, yeah, you are not being fair to the media that you are judging, the contemporary media. I would not call it an abdication. I think the Kenyan media has been adaptable. Yeah, there has been a very conscious realignment, a very conscious effort to adapt to the times, and which media must do. If you rigidly stick to certain values and certain rigidly, yeah, well, you must have certain core values, but you must apply them judiciously. You have to think of the circumstances under which you are working. There was a time when it was heroic to be seen as anti-government, viscerally anti-government, you know. And that is when there was a legitimate need to, we were fighting for change. There was need, the space was defined in terms of the progressive forces and the backwards forces. Then when change came, we had we moved into the pluralist era. Media had to re-examine itself and ask the question. And actually the nation struggled with this. There was a time that the nation even underwent a serious credibility crisis just when Kibaki took over. And it was examining the question of, do we continue in the same mode that we were on under Moi, or should we step back? So they are the core values, but how you apply them should be judicious. You really should ask yourself, what is the right thing to do at this time? And how far do you push it? You see it, even the Western media, yeah, the most open environments. There's always, it's a decision editors have to make all the time, weighing the tone, weighing the degree of the ferocity of the attack, weighing, you know, how virulent you'll be opposed to something. So I don't think that what the Kenyan media is going through right now is an abdication, it's an adjustment. But certain things have happened which should cause someone concern. Inevitably, there's a problem of trust, you see it. But I don't think it is self-inflicted. Well, to a degree it's self-inflicted, but it's also a result of the environment they are operating in. Digital disruption has caught media unaware. And they have continued, whether they have caught them with their guard down. And in terms of the question of, in terms of credibility, in terms of standards of accuracy. And now, because your audiences have an ability to cross-check what you're publishing immediately, and your audiences can respond, and yet our media is still operating as if they are in the times when the editor and the reporters and the newsrooms dictated what everybody should think. Yeah? They are therefore finding themselves being judged very harshly. So there has been, their credibility is being challenged, but not so much because they have failed, but because they have failed to respond to the environment they are operating in.
Failed to respond to the environment, but you see like the core is still intact. Do you see like the core is still intact?
Yes, the core is still intact. And I'm quite proud of the Kenyan media. I have traveled around Africa. I have seen the way media is related to government. I've seen the role that media is playing in society. And I always come back, I'm always grateful that the core values of media have remained intact in Kenya. There have been lapses depending on who is heading media at a particular time, depending on who owns media at a particular time. But the fact that even these lapses are discussed, for me, is an assurance that people are aware of what we ought to be. And therefore, the people are reminded. The very fact that this is highlighted, it is spotlighted, and it's discussed, and editors are judged, media is condemned, it's really quite reassuring. The worst thing that could happen is that this happened and there's no reaction.
Right. I'm going to just shift this to Komchatsi for a little bit. Odindo has talked about the environment that we are operating in right now. And digital, of course, probably being the biggest structural and most transformative change that we've seen in the way that news is gathered and processed in the past maybe 2 decades. Komchatsi, I want to hear from you. What in your mind is a little known or underappreciated trend that has shaped news gathering and meaning making over this time? If we just say that it's the internet, I don't think we're really unpacking what exactly it is that is shaping how we process news. And the other question that I would want you to answer together with the first one is, how important do you think institutional memory is in making the right moves at this time? We had one of our attendees in a previous webinar saying that we should burn it all down before rebuilding. Do you agree with this sentiment, or how do you respond to that?
Oh, those are very many questions, and considering that I'm now an elder, I don't know if I can remember all of them, but let me attempt. First, I think is that the one thing that I think is not generally, I think, appreciated is the fact that the public sphere has been democratized. We are in, I had Rosemary talking about Jürgen Habermas, who is one of my favorite theorists. The public sphere has been dramatically democratized, so that the editor is not necessarily, news is not what the editor says. News is what the audience says it is. And because of that, then you find that there's a challenge in terms of harnessing and harvesting all the voices that are in play and making a judgment call. So it's a lot about bringing all those voices together and having the clarity, the moral clarity and the clarity of voice to explain and to make sense of all these disparate happenings, views, opinions that are in our space. So I think the most dramatic thing really is that there are more players. News and information is not just a function of journalists and news sources, and then the consumers or the audiences are at the receiving end, and you just give them a hypodermic needle and that's it. People are participating very, very aggressively and very robustly in the construction of the news agenda. And what that means is that it's I think, to put it very crudely, I think it's a struggle for power, because media also is the business of creating narratives. And sometimes audiences are creating narratives that are completely bereft of what the facts are. So it's a negotiation. There are sections of the public that will want to believe certain things regardless of the facts. And it's a very, I don't envy the people who are in editorial chairs, because then they have to make that negotiation in terms of what do they affirm and what do they let pass. And even within that storm of all this, I think we like to call it an infodemic. Yeah, you have too much information, and all of it is not necessarily making sense or flowing in one direction. The second thing also is just the lingua. The lingua of public discourse is disparate in the sense that you have very bifurcated conversations. You have conversations going in 3, 4, 5 different directions, and you have to choose. Editors, journalists have to choose what is it that is going to help them to make or to create the narratives that they are interested in creating. I think to be able to do this requires a certain level of depth that was previously not demanded of journalists. Because I mean, you could read and write, you could understand a few things, you understood how governments were functioning. That is probably no longer sufficient, because the things that are going on in society, the debates that are going on in society require much deeper philosophical reflection. And then, of course, the other thing is the demand, I think, the demand for people to move away from objectivity as previously defined. And many people have tackled this question of objectivity. Many of us practice journalism when we were supposed to be objective and impartial. Increasingly, the publics that we are dealing with read objectivity as indifference. And the absence of empathy, I think, contributes significantly to the loss of trust and the loss of credibility among media, especially when we keep on insisting that we are going to be neutral bystanders. There's a lot of, because of the fast flow of information and ideas. There's a call, I think, for people, as Odindo was saying, for a lot more moral clarity and more at the drop of a hat rather than before. I don't know if I have dealt with all the issues you'd raised, or if I've forgotten one of them. One of them probably flew over my head.
I like what you said about moral clarity. That's something that at least I think about a lot, that objectivity really privileges certain positions which already have power, right? There's always, in objectivity, there's always a kind of, there are silences. There are things which are swept under the carpet all the time, right? Because of this aspiring to this, I call it a fictive fictive objectivity, right? It's kind of fictional. It's not true. And people, at least of my generation, are asking for people to be more honest, right? Be more honest about the eyes that you see the world through, and not assume that those eyes stand in for all kinds of eyes, right? For all kinds of perspectives.
Right. Yeah. You asked also about if there's a place for organized media. I think there is, because media sometimes is challenging very entrenched power, and to challenge entrenched power requires also certain tools and resources. And in our environment, generally, if I do a sort of unscientific scan of the environment, the people who end up in journalism are not always from the upper echelons of society. They are people who are probably from the other side of the street, and they don't come at this with a lot of resources. A lot of them are battling very severe survival issues. So organized media provides that buffer against some of the more flagrant violations, some of the more flagrant controls, such as the instrumentalization of defamation, legal processes, and other forms of censorship. And even though we have freedom of information laws, you need an enterprise, and you need a backbone, sometimes a financial backbone behind you, and the organizational structure to enable you to deploy, to take on some of the challenges that confront society. For example, if somebody wanted to take on one of the more contemporary questions of our time, which is the influence or the activity of China on the continent, it's a very demanding assignment to be able to connect that, which is probably part of the lived reality of people who are in the spaces where these projects are happening, to be able to connect that to where pain coming from. And if you don't have the resources, to take on that assignment, then you will be adjudged to have not performed it correctly. So yes, there is space for freelance and for individual independent journalism, but I think organized media presents, in my view, the best opportunity to take on big ticket projects that challenge government, that challenge entrenched corporate power, that challenge even entrenched religious and social power.
Thank you so much for that, Komchatsi. Dorothy, I want to swing this to you now. I have been in the presence of all of you on this panel when I was starting out at Nation those many years ago. It seems like a long time ago to me, but I'm sure to you it's just the other day. So you've been a Revise editor and now are a consulting editor, and a lot of things have been said about skills, just like Komchatsi just said as he was closing out his statement, about the capacity to actually do these kinds of stories that have big ticket and big impact journalism. In my time at the East African, there were so many trainings for so many things all the time, right? I attended some of them. Some of them were very, very good, changed the way I approached my reporting. But we've seen respondents of a certain study on Kenyan newsrooms saying that they think that journalists are actually overtrained, in the sense that these trainings are seen to be these kind of supply driven because there's an NGO that is available to train or something like that, more than supply driven. And Dorothy, from where you sit or where you were sitting as Revise editor, have you observed the impact of these trainings on the quality of stories filed? Do you see that these trainings actually have an impact on what comes out at the end of the day? I once was asked to do a training on data journalism a couple of years ago. And then when I followed up on my trainees, it turns out that none of them were actually putting into practice the thing that we had spent a whole week doing. So you see a journalist trained, for example, to cover budgets, government budgets or government finance, and then you see that they're actually not putting it into practice. So Dorothy, I just want to hear from you what you think about this skills and quality question. How does it look like from your perspective as Revise editor, and what do you think we can do to narrow the skills gap?
Thank you so much, Christine. I think that training is something that can never be lost. It is just the environment within which it is applied that really matters in this context. I'll give you an example of one of the star writers who has been a senior editor at the Nation Media Group, which is one of the organizations that I'm still very much associated with, even though in the different category of consultant. And I'll not shy of mentioning names here. I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, attending a training workshop with David Aduda. It was World Bank sponsored. It was on education. And although Aduda was already very much on the education docket, I want to believe that the skills and his involvement in those trainings is what has made him who he is, because he's still an authority when it comes to matters education. So that is why I want to say that training is never lost. And how it is applied now, that is another question. You will find that in the nation at the moment, which just rebranded not so long ago, the volume of the content has been so abridged that you find it difficult to articulate everything that you would wish to articulate, you know, when it comes to those skills that have been imparted on you. In front of me is one of my stars, you know, at the beginning of development journalism. That is, I'll use what the words she used, like her mother, Rosemary, is like my daughter in the media. And when we started Interlink Rural Information Service, otherwise called IRIS, we started on a training. It was a training and it was on environment. And right now, it's the rage, you know. There is even a linkage between COVID and the environment. And it cannot be denied. It's just, how do you take an issue and run with it? And in Rosemary's case, the reproductive health angle, mother and child, has been extremely important, especially where she came from before she joined Ford and then now Strathmore. But I'm very much in touch with where she left, because a mother doesn't abandon her children. And some of the things they are doing are extremely amazing. You know, that initiative that they are involved in floriculture and the abuse of women. Those are issues that you don't just get, you know, you don't just go and write about them without some background training. And when you are trained and you have interacted with trainers and you know what the issues are, then they come out with, you know, so saliently that the public cannot ignore what you're talking about. And actually, AWC is making waves in the horticulture industry and transformation of women, the status of women who have hitherto been used as sex objects. Right now, sexual harassment is it's an issue that you don't want to dare to do in the floriculture industry, because the information is out there and awareness has been created, So I want to say that training is extremely important. And if there are some deviants who come out of training with nothing, I call them deviants because they are people who go out to train and put into effect what they have learned. And there are people who go on an outing, Let's face it, the worst offenders are, of course, our government. They'll go to big meetings and come back and bring us terrible protocols for adoption, to which they never contributed because they went on a shopping spree. So the seriousness of people who are picked, and I want to say that in its heyday, IRIS trained some of the best journalists, and they're out there. They ended up in big organizations, either on media desks or on the subjects that were their niche while they were in IRIS. And that is not a loss, because if the media can train people and put them on a higher plane, it's not a loss. It only creates space for others to step into that space, So nothing is ever lost. And what can I say, really? I think the media has played a very important role in training of journalists.
Thank you so much for that, Dorothy. Definitely some of these really important issues that have shaped public opinion and consciousness would not have happened if certain skills were not imparted on the people who ended up reporting about these issues. I just want to turn to our attention now to the Q&A window, and I'm going to read a comment here. An anonymous attendee says, digital disruption did not get Kenyan media unaware, but we never read the signs and acted accordingly. We are currently playing catch up. Odindo, I want to swing this back to you now. As we come to the end of our conversation, this is going to be my second to last question for our panel today. Speaking about being caught unaware of what the trend has been, you've been a senior journalist, editor, and media manager for over 3 decades now. And I recently read this study that, have I lost Odindo? I see like he has disappeared. He needs to join back on the call. I don't know where he went. I think we lost him.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, there you are. You're back. Great. Good. So this is what I was saying. I read this study by an organization called Reboot that did an extensive, ecosystem study of the Kenyan media, and some of the respondents, talked about a trend that had been emerging in the recent maybe decade or so, where senior editors have been getting younger and younger. So at a time when an editor would have like maybe 10 or so years experience, we're having editors who have, spent less time on the beat, but are bringing to the table, some skills that are deemed important. For example, being more in tune with emerging trends in the digital landscape. I'm just wondering from you, Odinda, what's your reaction to this idea of, or what was raised in this study about editors being younger than was the case, for example, when you were coming up? Is this a trend you've observed, and what do you think the impact of this is? We've had a lot of people talking about kind of a loss of mentors or a loss of mentorship in newsrooms. That's a trend that younger journalists are really struggling with right now. And I'd like to hear what your reaction is to this.
Mm-hmm. They say in my language that monkeys are the people you should turn to when you are making a judgment about the forest, meaning that they have a direct interest.
Right.
Yeah. Now, the thing about the juniorization of the newsroom, as you had mentioned, is that it's a trend which is not peculiar to Kenya. It's not peculiar to Africa. I think it's a worldwide trend, and there are good things about it, and there are certain things also regrettable about it. I think the reality is that it's part of what happens on the labor market in a country when you have a supply of skilled manpower, which is a direct product of the education system. When you have more people who are younger and are well-skilled, then the economy, or the, what do you call it? The corporate sector responds accordingly. And then it picks from this available labor force. And that's what's happening in Kenya as it has happened elsewhere. Now, certain things have happened in the newsroom. Yes, editors have become younger. I don't think that's a bad thing. Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. One, having younger editors during the digital disruption has enabled media enterprises to be more agile and more responsive. They also are able to, they are more responsive to the times. I think younger editors are more responsive to the changes in fashion, changes in trends. They are more in tune with the orientation of their audience, because the audience right now, the majority of them are much younger people, and the connecting with them is one of the ways in which a media can survive. You have to connect with your audiences. I'll give you an example. When the very early local hip hop stars died, some guy called Issa Juma. Yeah. How old is it? Issa Juma or somebody?
Issa, yes. Issa.
Yeah. We sat in the newsroom. The story came. And right up to the chief sub-editor who was selecting content, the Issa Juma they knew belonged to Simba Wanyika, yeah, in Tanzania. And it was like, so what if Issa Juma has died? His history right now. And you won't believe it, the story got a paragraph mentioned in page 3 of the Nation the next day, and the uproar online. Yeah? We all asked ourselves, wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah? It was on radio, it was online, the entire news space was ablaze. And when we sat down to find out what had gone wrong, we found, first of all, that the Issa Juma that had died was part of a new generation of musicians who was a real star out there. He was big. Yeah.
I didn't know he was big. He was massive. I mourned for a week.
There you are. But what happened in that case, and the guys who were with me at that time will confess, there was a total disconnect between the people making editorial decisions and the interests of the audience, the audiences they were serving. And it was further exemplified in the launch of Pulse by the Standard data, which was a very good, very keen reading of the changing trends. They came up with this product. So what I'm saying is that having editors and decision makers who are in tune with the changes in the marketplace, changes in the audiences, and the audience likes and dislikes, their preferences, is good. But newsrooms are also a bit like the legal system. Journalism is a bit like the legal fraternity or law. And you need a reservoir of knowledge, what you call institutional memory earlier, because we deal in knowledge. We're a knowledge industry. And the thing about knowledge is that the longer people are at it, the better and more competent they are. So what we have seen in the newsrooms right now is that as editors become younger, as more of the number of journalists in the newsroom become younger, there is a serious gap in the connection of the dots. Interpretation, backgrounding, explanation of events. Once I was in the newsroom just when Kibaki was fighting was in his campaign, the campaign that made him president, and we had this young reporter looking at the news when he had the accident in Machakos, and she very innocently remarked, there was a background being given of Kibaki. She very innocently remarked, "You mean this man was in Kanu?" For her, it was a shock that Kibaki had actually been in Kanu, because here he was, she had known him as one of the biggest opponents of Kanu in the campaigns. But you find that political stories, political reporting suffers a lot when there isn't contextualizing, when there isn't background, and analysis is not very well informed. And I know instances when the newsrooms right now, as they are constituted, have had to reach out to older journalists who have retired, because the editors recognize that this subject can only be handled by so-and-so, or someone who has this background. You can't rely on someone reading the library files. So backgrounding, institutional knowledge, memory is lost. But there's also culture in the newsroom. I always feel that younger leaders who are more adaptable, as long as they have been trained properly and they have the right level of skill, move faster. Yeah, older journalists will slow down change, and media has to be adaptable and very fast. And I saw this, and all the newsrooms are grappling with this right now. The transition, the need to reorganize the newsroom, the need to refocus on the digital audiences. It's not just a question of scale, it's also a question of agility and the speed with which individual journalists respond. I always found that when you recruited a lot of young people into the newsroom, then you had to deal with the challenge of reconciling the older people and the younger people. Yeah, and as a leader, you really had to be very smart. Yeah? Yet you knew what you wanted from both of them, but there was always a clash. There is the generation that says this has to be done, and they don't want to be asked why. But then you're dealing with a generation who you always have to explain why. So there's a bit of what the older generation would say, a lack of self-discipline, the rigid adherence to that which is right. We tend to take liberties with certain things that ultimately impact on how you are judged, on the quality that you deliver. So that has happened. I think it's the direct consequences of having a larger pool of journalists who are younger, and maybe they come from a background or they have been born in a time when things are more liberal, you can be more flexible. But at the end of the day, our audience are demanding certain things. They're demanding accuracy. They're demanding high language standards. They are demanding clean copy, and you really have to impose this on yourself. It is easy. It sounds like a cop-out to say that only the older people can deliver this. But I think it's one of the things that is being lost. Yeah. I could go on and on.
Oh, thank you.
I'm beating the drums for the older generation, but I don't know.
We can hear those drums. Serious drums. Unfortunately, as happens every webinar, every time we do this, we've run out of time. The hour goes by so fast. And I'd like to invite all our panelists to now make their closing remarks, but I want them to respond to this final question as their closing remarks. What do you think needs to stay in the past? We've talked a lot about the good stuff that should remain, that we should carry forward into the future. Dindo talked about institutional memory. I mean, all our panelists have really brought that aspect onto the table. But now I want to hear as we close, what do you think should stay in the past or should disappear? Or if you're seeing it's disappearing, you think it's a good thing. You're like, yes, let it disappear completely because we don't need to carry that into the future. Maybe let's start with Dorothy. What do you think should stay in the past, or what do you think you're happy is disappearing? Unmute yourself so that we can hear you. Yep.
It's just a moment.
There you go. I can hear you.
It is one of the strangest questions that joined this webinar, because the past is inevitable and it just happens. It's not a question of what has to remain in the past. If it is past, it will be past, For instance, I never attended a conference without my portable typewriter until the laptop came. And the portable typewriter just vanished. I don't even see it. I don't even know where it went, because the time came. Change comes, and when it comes, it ushers in the future, So it's not a question of what should remain in the past. The past will just happen, you know. When the mobile came, you know, it was a status symbol. It was a status symbol to own one. 250,000 shillings to, you know, to talk on a mobile. You were feared if you were talking on a mobile. Right now, my visiting little nieces here, I've given them kabambes because they need to communicate with their parents, you know. But back then, it was just like a dream, you know. When I went to Tanzania, for instance, they were ahead of us, and I could see in a matatu the numbers with the mobiles. I said, my God, what kind of country is this? There they beat us in a very serious way. But all this is passing and others are coming. So it's not a question of defining what remains in the past. I still stick with my notebook because technology can fail. The battery can just let you down or something, a glitch. And what you are recording, or you realize that apparently you are actually not recording. What happens if you are not scribbling your notes? Do you go and then tell your source that, oh, I'm sorry, can we start again? That is extremely unprofessional, you know? And then at that point, you just want to pray, like in most cases, that you are not going to be asked, can you replay that, you know? So a notebook is something that I'm not going to leave. I have one here. And I believe so much in it that in spite of my digital recorder, which is so digital and very modern.
I hear you.
You're not going to convince me to leave my notebook alone. So there are things that faithfulness to accuracy, you know, just being accurate is extremely important. And therefore, I take the social media with a pinch of salt, you know. I'll not pick something there and run with it. I'll really need to counter check because there's a lot of lies there. There are also tips that you can build on. So as we embrace the future, let us not forget where we came from, because that will be our undoing.
Thank you so much for that, Dorothy. I'm going to ask Rosemary to also give us her closing remarks. What do you think needs to stay in the past? What do you think you're happy to see disappear as we finish this session?
Thanks, Christine, and thanks for great remarks by the panelists. And I wish there could be more such a actually dialogue meeting, especially with the young journalists, to hear what it meant to produce a deadline newspaper at 3 p.m. with limited resources, but also with few skills that Dorothy says that notebook became our kind of defining factor. What I think needs to still be there, it's ethical way of doing journalism. And journalism ethics actually was the pillar that made journalists become actually a professional that everyone used to look forward to. A professional that if people heard you're a journalist, people will respect you. That respect and trust needs to come back by actually applying the code of conduct and the ethical standards that was there before. And then that brings me to question, when Dorothy was talking about development journalism, few of you might know that actually Kaleste Juma was one of the very few people that trained us brought in development journalism into Kenya and started the PANOS before he went to Harvard University. And that footprint still is what we are seeing up to now. So legacy is critical, and legacy documented, captured, will always shape the way journalism will go forward. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, public journalism has actually also failed us the way the private sector journalism is also trying to be seen to be failing us. Public journalism is a space for the ordinary mwananchi to get the right information. So we need to get that one right, because Kenya News Agency was good and critical during those times. KBC was seen as a de facto. But now when the minister himself says that KBC has debt worth trillions of shillings, you are start asking ourselves, where is the taxpayers' money going from? And when you look at the digitized market, while at Ford, I happened to work with the Indian government when they were moving from 2G to 3G. And there was kind of a collaborative by the community media that private sectors in the telecos need to actually invent in the community radio station because of the amount of money. Here we are talking about moving from 4G to 5G. There's not that communication. Awareness of ecosystem on what each and every change, move, impacts or bring is critical to us to be able to have as a legacy. And as Odindo and Dorothy says, mentorship. Some of us are where we are because of mentorship. And during a time there, you even look down upon your seniors. You are actually judged by the harsh words that can be there within the community. Whenever you went in the community, you respected your seniors in the media industry, irrespective of which media houses they came from. They were seen as senior journalists. So respect and mentorship is critical for us to be able to adhere to ethos and integrity that govern the media sector.
Thank you for that. I'm going to let Odindo now give us his closing thoughts, and then we'll close out. We'll finish with Komchet. You need to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. There you go.
One of the things I would wish stays in the past is the what I would call the shallowness of reporting, which characterized journalism of the early days. I know it was a product of how media had evolved, the quality of reporters who were recruited into the newsrooms, and generally a sign of the times, if you like. But it is so refreshing when you interact with the media, whether it's digital, whether it's broadcast, whether it's print, which carries content which is knowledgeable, and doesn't make the most basic mistakes that for many years characterized our media. This put off readers, in the sense that media was not responding to the increasing sophistication of the audiences. And that's what also resulted in the half-hearted attempts to encourage specialization in the newsrooms. But the best thing that has happened really has been the increased knowledge levels among journalists, the authoritativeness of the content they generate, and basically increasing the credibility and the use to which media can be put. The other thing that I would wish would stay in the past and never come back is the partisanship that defined media. It came from ownership, and it also came from the attitude of the government of the time. And media, either out of fear, but often as a result of pressure from owners, there was a lot of interference with journalism. But because of the digital space and the times that we live in now and the multiplicity of outlets that exist, you can't do that and get away with it now. You will do it, yes, but you will also be exposed. So if the nation kills a story because Safaricom, and this is just an example, because Safaricom has insisted, you know that it will be out the marketplace will get to know. So in the old days, the story disappeared and nobody talked about it. And it extended to coverage of politics. And then you found, as a result, important media institutions in the country took sides in very important debates like the change of the constitution, not on whether it was right or wrong, but merely because certain individuals were in bed with certain certain influential personalities. Therefore, you saw the Standard was on one side on the change of the constitution debate, the Nation was on the other side. Not because of what was right for the country, but because of the influence of certain individuals. That is something that, yes, can happen now, and sometimes there are attempts to do it. But the beauty is that there is intervention by the marketplace. It is exposed. There are avenues through which this can be highlighted and discussed. Lastly, I think that the trend, one of the trends I really like and I would really encourage right now, which we preserve, is the increasing involvement of journalists in all aspects of media. The days when you were a writer or just a court reporter, and you stayed that way, are gone. If you wanted to grow in industry, then right now, if you want to grow in industry, then you've got to learn. The structure of media enterprises forces people to be aware of the commercial aspect of this business, forces the journalists to be aware of the production. You don't just write stories and leave them. Right now, you have to combine the technological skills plus the journalistic skills. And I like this. This is one of the best things that has happened, because then journalists will influence the evolution of media rather than the owners of money and the commercial people defining the direction that media goes.
Thank you so much for that, for those very insightful comments. Komchetsi, as we close, what do you think needs to stay in the past, or you're glad has disappeared or is disappearing?
Very unfortunate to be the last to speak, but I think the one thing that needs to change or needs to stay in the past is management models. My view is that the sort of hierarchical, militaristic administration of media and media organizations should happily remain in the past. And so that, you have this paths to promotion and the frustration that I experienced a bit of it at some point, but the frustration that you have is that you feel you need to lose the experienced people because the only positions available are positions of editor. But there are other people. It's possible for people to grow within their spaces as writers. There are people who have, retired as correspondents, and they are very, very good at their job. And media, I think, in our environment has not figured out a way of retaining some of that talent so that people can be dignified and appreciated in the roles that they play without necessarily having to aspire to climb the career ladder hierarchically. So that militaristic administration and management of the media, where the editor is the one saying, sometimes it's your science writer who actually knows the best angle on a science story. But also additional to that, in terms of just one being able to entrench media as flat organizations, is to allow for a posture of learning. And that posture of learning enables journalists to be both alert, but also to provide intellectual leadership. And I think that journalism requires intellectual leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Komchetsi. We've come to the end of not just this session, but the 5-part series that we've been holding on the future of the Kenyan media. That was just an amazing mic drop moment from all our panelists. And a wonderful way to close out, all these heavy thoughts and heavy lifting that we've been doing, thinking about the space that we are in. In the first session, we were mapping the terrain of the media ecosystem. In the second one, we were talking about distrust in the Kenyan media and these trends on misinformation and the like. The third session, we talked about alternative content creators, what's happening in the YouTube space, what's happening with all kinds of different innovations. And in our last session, we talked about journalists' lives matter, that many times doing this work puts people into physical and psychological danger, and we were just holding the line for them at that point. Today, we've tied it all together with perspectives from the best of the past and appreciating the importance of institutional memory, that we are not just butterflies flying in the wind, doing amazing things, but we need to be anchored. We need to be agile, but not unmoored, right? We need to have both roots and wings. And I'd just like to say a very big thank you to our panelists for making time to be here with us today. And the same to our attendees, people who have taken time from their Tuesday afternoons to be here to think through these questions together. I'd just like to make a quick announcement that all our insights from the 5 sessions will be up on Baraza's website by the end of next week. This is text, and we're working on editing together the video and as well as audio. So keep following us on our social media handles to know when this content will be up, when these articles and video clips and audio clips will be up. And I'm sure it will make some good conversations over the Christmas holiday, and will energize us to begin 2021 after a very difficult year. 2020 has shown us things. I'm sure we'll all agree on that. All right, so to our attendees who are on the call right now, on the webinar right now, feel free to leave the session or to drop in a line in the chat window. If you want to quickly touch base with one of the panelists, please just go ahead. I'm seeing people coming in and saying thank you for the insightful remarks. There's someone here who wants to get in touch with Joe. Maybe we can put the two in contact. But thank you so much for everyone who has been on this call. We're going to leave the webinar room open for about 5 or so minutes, so that if there are any thank you notes or any outstanding issues, I would put in quotes, we'll keep responding to them over the next 5 or so minutes. We have a thank you note from Teddy Warrior. Well, he says, well done, Dorothy, Rosemary, and Joseph Odindo. You are all superstars. Continue keeping us honest. David Indeje says, great insights. Tukamchatsi as well. Thank you, our elders, for showing us the way. And so just keep on writing in as you're leaving the session. You can also just write in to say bye, kwaheri, because our 5-part series has come to a well-deserved end. Rosemary left the session about 5 minutes ago. I think she had another call that she had to join. And so thank you to her in absentia. Muhoro says, thank you, Baraza, for hosting this series. Anand Madhvani, great series. Thank you. Thank you, Anand. I see you on Twitter. Thank you for being here. Yeah, so keep them coming as you're leaving, and we can continue this conversation on our socials. This is by no means the end of the talk. We have not concluded this, of course. There's so much more to say and to think about. And we will continue the conversation over on our Twitter handles. I think that's the place where we talk. Yeah. All right. So maybe just a few more minutes of having this room open, and then we can feel free to leave. Panelists, thank you so much again. If you need to run, please do go ahead. Before you go, you could look at the Q&A session or the chat session and see if there's anything you would like to respond to before you leave. I see Odindo has responded saying, diversification does not mean abandoning your key business. In business, there's horizontal and vertical integration, and whatever direction media chooses to stay alive, it should directly support the core business. There's always that business question at the end of it. That sustainability is not an abstraction. It's a real decision, series of decisions that subscribing for the newsletter. I'm just going to take note of your email and add you to the database immediately. I've just copy pasted your email and I'm sending it along to our communications team. I've copied and pasted it, so it's going straight to the comms team, and they'll put you on the mailing list immediately. Karibu sana, Antoine. And I'm going to read your article as well. All right. I think that's all. That's everyone, I think. That would be it. I am going to leave this meeting room in the next minute or so. And then our friends over at Baraza, my friends and colleagues, will close the webinar room.